Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my yard preparing to check in on the outdoor worm bag, and last time we were here we took a quick peek at this really beautiful maple tree that I have overhead. It's the tree that we usually work in the shade of, and today the shade just isn't really in the opportune spot, so I've actually dragged the outdoor worm bag over to a spot where we can work in the shade. That's mainly because the bright sunlight does kind of make it difficult to get a good shot. So the collection of leaves out here is underway, and as you can see, my garden is still surviving despite a couple of evenings where we've actually gotten to freezing temperatures. The garden is still growing. I've picked all the fruit off of it, but I've not yet disassembled the garden. And tomorrow we're even getting near 80 degrees. That's in the mid-20s for you Fahrenheit speakers out there. And well, as you can see, I've still got some work to do. Once this tree over here drops all of its leaves, I've still got a fair bit of leaf collection to take care of. But we're not out here to look at my garden or walk at the leaves. We're here to check in on the outdoor worm bag. So I've already removed the brick. The brick that was resting out here on top of the plywood to protect it from getting lifted up and invaded, because while this piece of plywood was still a single piece of wood, it made it pretty difficult for intruder creatures to get at what was in here. They would sometimes reach around the edges and poke their arms down, but with this thing separating the way it is, it's made it pretty simple for them to push one or the other piece aside to gain access. So I've got a collection here of delicious foods for them. We've got some pumpkin, some tomato, some peppercorns, lettuce, and perhaps a few other things in addition to a coffee. And I even went down to the wormery to grab some grit, a little bit of pulverized eggshell in this origami cup, so we can include a little bit of grit with today's meal as well. So these outdoor check-ins can go quick or they can go slow, but I believe that today's check-in should go pretty quick. It's a pretty routine feeding. I didn't even come out here prepared with any information about the worm bin's age or number of feedings. The one thing that does come to mind though is the fact that it was 14 days since we last came in here to feed them. And the last time we came in here, there were actually 2 coffee filters left out here over the middle to indicate to ourselves precisely where we fed, which is typically down the middle. Today we'll have one of these to mark where we're feeding. And the food that they got last time, I know there was fig, a few figs that were frozen, and the figs were actually in really sorry shape already. They were pretty much just falling apart. And how do you like that? Usually out here in the worm bag, the outdoor worm bag version 6.0, we don't really get these little worm parties very frequently. But it makes me wonder if perhaps some of the stuff they might have gotten last time is still remaining in here and they're just mobbing around the yummy foods. I don't know. We'll pick around a little bit more and try to get a better look at what's going on in here. Well, let's set these little guys aside. Well, you know what? Before we do that, let's see if there's a way to ascertain what it is that they're gathering around. I did feel like there was something going on here, but it's really just a mound of worms. I thought I felt something that resembled perhaps leftover food. Who knows? Maybe the food was just there a moment ago and they just ate the last little tiny scrap of it. You know, besides fig, I know there were 2 days worth of coffee placed in here, so that was a pretty nice, generous feeding. I think what we're giving them today would also count as a fairly generous feeding. I'm not sure how much longer we're going to continue to see nice, warm, mild days like what we're expecting tomorrow. We are actually about halfway through the autumn season at this point. So the onset of cooler temperatures very soon would be completely normal. I mean, for that fact, I do believe that the somewhat warmer weather we're seeing right now is a bit unseasonable. I'm seeing lots and lots of leftover leafy matter here from the last check-in. I thought about maybe stepping aside, going over to the pile of leaves right next to me on the ground and grabbing them a little bit more to serve as sort of a supplemental bedding to go hand in hand with their feeding. So why don't I do just that? Let me go grab them a couple handfuls of leaves just to include with this one, even though they've got a nice abundant amount of it now blended in with the surrounding materials. So now what I have here in my hand is not all that much. Well, I don't know, is it? I did kind of squish it together, so maybe it is actually quite a bit. At some point, I do believe we'll probably be trying to get this system geared up to harvest the lovely castings that are accumulating in here, and most likely introduce the worms to the indoor wormery. But for now, they're going to be staying outside to enjoy the lovely weather. But once things cool off, I'd really prefer keeping the system nice and active. And for that to be happening, the worms need a somewhat warmer environment. Once things get really cold, the worms do tend to slow down considerably. And more recently, that's kind of been my cue to bring the system indoors so that the worms can remain productive, continuing to break down my kitchen scraps and other household waste. So let's not forget, we've got a nice generous portion of grit to include with today's feeding, as well as this piece of paper, which will also serve as supplementary bedding down here. So let's use the covering up of the feeding zone as an excuse to bring up some material from the outer edges. It does seem like on this occasion the worms were sort of centralized around the middle of the bin where we last fed 2 weeks ago. As for leftovers, I can't say that I really saw much, if any, leftovers other than the bedding that we used. And oh, you know what? Wouldn't be me if I didn't forget something. We almost forgot to drop in their portion of coffee, which I guess at this point will simply be applied right out here on the surface. Perhaps we can still grab a little bit of material to blend it in with so that the worms can just be kind of cruising through the contents of their lovely home and have all kinds of delicious coffee to nibble on while they're in the process. So on top of all that, we can now drop in the coffee filter, which will once again serve the function of feeding zone indicator, kind of a little traditional thing I like to do down in my systems in the wormery. Something that I don't really do all that often here. And there we go. I must have knocked over the plywood top covering and the paper that was resting on top of it. So let's get ourselves pulled back together here. The sun is creeping over this direction now, so before we get into a really harsh lighting situation, I think we're going to bring this check-in and feeding to a close. Once again, I'll return that brick to hold down this piece of plywood to prevent unwanted visitors from coming in here and intruding on the safe space that I've created for these little wormies. I'd hate to think that some sort of creature is actually feasting on our worms. and I do my best to protect them that way. At some point maybe we'll come up with a replacement for this, but even after we figured it was time to decommission it, we sort of brought it back to life, and here it continues in that same function. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.